Las Vegas, Nevada, Sin City, with a population of 640,000 within city limits and a metro population of 2.3 million. It is the largest metropolitan area in Nevada and the 29th largest metro in the United States. Las Vegas is an internationally renowned resort city with millions of people from all over the world coming to visit it for its gambling, entertainment, shopping, and nightlife. The city is located on the southern tip of Nevada in the Las Vegas Valley on the floor of the Mojave Desert. The valley is surrounded by mountain ranges, making mountains visible from almost everywhere in the city. Being in a desert, Las Vegas has a subtropical hot desert climate, typically experiencing long, incredibly hot summers and short, mild winters with warm transitional periods in between. The city has an average of about 310 sunny days per year, while annual rainy days amount to less than 30. Las Vegas has been particularly vulnerable to torrential flash floods in the past, but the city has made an effort to mitigate their effects through improved drainage systems. Las Vegas used to be one of the largest US cities to not have a major league sports team until 2017 when the NHL launched an expansion team, the Vegas Golden Knights, in the city. The Golden Knights were a success attendance-wise in their inaugural season and even reached the Stanley Cup Finals. They then lost those finals, but made them again in 2023, winning their first Stanley Cup only in their 6th season. The WNBA team Las Vegas Aces was launched a year after the Golden Knights in 2018 and have already won 2 WNBA championships. And in 2020, the 3-time Super Bowl champion Oakland Raiders of the NFL relocated to Las Vegas, while the MLB team Athletics, also from Oakland, is planning to move to the City of Lights by 2028. Famous Las Vegans include boxers Floyd Mayweather and Mike Tyson, tennis player Andre Agassi, actor Nicolas Cage, DJ Steve Aoki, and the magicians Penn and Teller. Now, if you don't know, this is the last part of a 4-part series where we have been visiting interesting locations all around the Western United States and Canada. If you haven't seen the previous episodes about Seattle, Vancouver, and Portland yet, I recommend you check them out from the link in the description. This video, as always, will be divided into 2 main parts. First, I will talk about the history of Las Vegas, after which I want to share my experience visiting the city and exploring some of the interesting sights it has to offer. I'll include timestamps, so feel free to skip around. I think we can all agree that Las Vegas is a pretty abnormal city. I mean, where else do you have a massive metropolis built on the gambling industry, filled with recreations of the Eiffel Tower, Piazza San Marco, and New York City in the middle of the desert? And as you would expect, the history of the city is pretty interesting. The Las Vegas Valley had always been a hotspot for human activity in the region, thanks to its abundant natural springs that created an oasis in the desert. The lush landscape, at least when compared to the rest of the surrounding area, has sustained human habitation for thousands of years. Now, it's hard to pinpoint exactly when the first people settled around the Las Vegas Valley, but some sources suggest that the nomadic Paleo Indians could have been the first people to arrive and settle around Red Rock Canyon and the natural springs of Tule Springs around 10,000 years ago. The first people we have evidence of residing in Red Rock Canyon are the Pinto Gypsum people around 5,500 years ago. Ancient Puebloans, who are known for building the Cliff Palace in Mesa Verde, came to the area at around the year 1 AD. Meanwhile, the Patayan and Southern Paiute tribes are believed to have migrated to and settled the area by around 900 AD, leaving behind all sorts of roasting pits, rock art, tools, and pottery. However, do keep in mind that these years are just estimations and should be taken with a grain of salt. By the time the first Europeans arrived in the Americas, the Paiute and Patayan tribes were the only ones left in the valley. The Paiute were primarily hunters and gatherers and still live in the area today, while the Patayans were more agricultural and settled the banks of the Colorado River. They, on the other hand, left the area around the time of the first contact with Europeans in the early 1800s. The first non-native to encounter the valley is credited to be Rafael Rivera, who served as a scout on the Spanish merchant Antonio Armijo's caravan to Los Angeles in 1830. See, New Mexico, or the Mexican territory of Nuevo Mexico at the time, was located over here, and water, with the boats and the other important stuff for trading, was over here. And so it was important to establish a trade route between the two to ensure the viability of the territory. Luckily for Armijo and company, the land between the two already had quite a few disconnected trade routes established by Native Americans, as well as earlier Spanish and American expeditions. What Armijo did was to connect parts of these routes to create a direct path from Apiquio, Nuevo Mexico, to Los Angeles, Alta California. And on this path just happened to be the valley that would in time become the home of the modern city of Las Vegas. On Christmas Day, 1829, Armijo's party had made it to the southwestern corner of modern-day Utah when Rivera broke off from the caravan to scout ahead for a source of water. Rivera headed off to unexplored areas, and after around 2 weeks and 100 miles southwest from where he had started, he came across the valley with its relatively lush vegetation and, more importantly, its natural springs. Amazed by the abundant grasslands, Rivera named the area Las Vegas, or the Meadows in Spanish. After Rivera returned to report his findings to the main caravan, Armijo marked the area as Las Las Vegas on his map that he later submitted in his report to the governor of Nuevo Mexico, which was then published by the Mexican government, putting Las Vegas quite literally on the map. The first Americans to arrive in the area came later in the same year, when a trapping expedition from Santa Fe to Los Angeles led by Ewing Young passed just a few dozen miles southwest of the valley. Among the expedition was a young frontiersman by the name of Kit Carson, who gained enough knowledge and experience of the area that 14 years later in 1844, he was hired as a guide for an American group led by the explorer John C. Fremont. Fremont, spelled with a funky little E, was chosen to take a group of scientists, scouts, and spies for the United States military on an expedition to map out the area between the Rockies and the Pacific Ocean in preparation for a possible war with Mexico. When the group was exploring the area near the modern-day California-Nevada border, they ran into a Mexican man whose old traveling party had been attacked by a group of Native Americans. The man quickly became an additional guide for Fremont's party, and just a little over a week later, the group made their way to the large valley in the northeast, which Fremont learned was called Las Vegas. Fremont wrote a short text about the camping grounds in his diaries, talking about the natural springs of the area. Now, surprise surprise, the war with Mexico did happen after the United States invaded Mexico, starting the Mexican-American War from 1846 to 1848. And spoiler alert, in case you've never looked at a map, America won that war, taking Texas, Nuevo Mexico, Alta California, and most importantly for a little story here, the Las Vegas Valley. The valley spent the next 2 years in the large unorganized territory of the US before becoming a part of the New Mexico territory. This time in English. In 1855, inspired by the writings of John C. Fremont, a group of 30 Mormon missionaries from the Utah Territory came to the Las Vegas Valley and founded a Mormon colony there. They built the first permanent building in Las Vegas, which was a small 150 square foot fort near a creek. However, after just 2 years, due to infighting, the scorching hot summers, and difficulty growing crops, the missionaries decided to abandon the fort and return to Utah in 1857. The remains of the fort are preserved to this day at the old Las Vegas Mormon Fort State Historic Park near downtown Las Vegas. For the next few years, the area stayed unoccupied by non-native settlers, besides for the occasional traveler and trade caravan. The surrounding area wasn't completely empty though, as there were some gold and silver mines, for example down in El Dorado Canyon. During the American Civil War, the US Army tried to deceive Confederate spies in California by falsely publicizing that they had reclaimed the old Mormon fort and renamed it to Fort Baker. During the same time, prospecting, or the search for valuable natural minerals, was a common way for entrepreneurs in the West to make money, and one of these entrepreneurs was a man from Ohio named Octavius Decatur O.D. Gass. This is a real name. Gass had moved to the west from Ohio in 1850 during the California Gold Rush, and after some moderate success prospecting in California, he relocated to El Dorado Canyon in 1862 to continue his business endeavors. Unfortunately, having a cool name doesn't guarantee finding any valuable minerals, so after filing 18 claims and spending 2 years, he came out pretty much empty-handed, and decided to relocate somewhere else. In a lucky turn of events, he discovered a large salt deposit in the Las Vegas Valley in 1865 and started working the find. With the money he made, he bought the rights to the old Mormon fort from the brother of one of the original Mormon settlers who built it, and moved in with 2 other men. By this time, the Paiutes had dwindled in population and had to negotiate a new treaty with the US government, which gave up the land around the fort to the United States. In the meantime, Gass divided up his 640-acre land claim with his 2 business partners, initially owning 160 acres himself. They started a ranch and named it the Las Vegas Rancho, because they thought it sounded cool in Spanish. They raised cattle and horses, grew a variety of crops, and to work the fields they hired local Paiutes, as they could be paid in crops such as beans instead of cash. In 1867, despite complaints from Gass and Arizona politicians, Las Vegas was absorbed from the Arizona Territory by the new state of Nevada, placing it in the state it is in today. Back at the ranch, Gass started making wine at the ranch's vineyard, which made the ranch quite popular with travelers going through the old Spanish Trail. By 1872, Gass had bought out his partners to take control of the whole 640-acre lot, and by 1878 he had added the nearby Spring Ranch to his holdings. He seemed like a successful rancher, as he had a total of 960 acres of land and more than 30 employees, including a veterinarian, a blacksmith, and a carpenter. However, beneath the surface he was deeply in debt. In fact, he had been trying to sell the ranch for the past 10 years, and in 1879 he borrowed a large sum of money in gold from Archibald Stewart, a successful rancher from Nevada. Gass had expected a big harvest that could pay off the debt, but after an unfortunate string of bad weather destroyed much of it, he found himself in default, and Stewart foreclosed the ranch. He might have done this on purpose, however, as he and his wife were starting to get worried about their children's education and wanted to move out, but couldn't since they weren't able to sell the ranch. Regardless, he moved out with his family in 1881, along with 1,500 heads of cattle. He continued prospecting for a while on the west coast of the US and Mexico, and later moved to help with his son with an orange orchard in Bryn Mawr. This guy really has a thing for unusual names. And there he died in 1924. Today, the gas peak of the Las Vegas mountain range and the gas avenue in downtown Las Vegas are named after him. Back in Las Vegas, the ranch was occupied by the Stewart family after gas had defaulted on his loan. Stewart started running the ranch until it could be sold, and he ran it pretty successfully, selling beef, vegetables, fruit, and wine. The ranch also stayed a popular stop for travelers on the Old Spanish Trail. Everything was going well at the ranch until 1884, when things started going not so well, when Archibald was murdered after an altercation with his neighbors. This left Archibald's wife Helen with sole ownership of the ranch. With little experience operating an entire ranch, Helen tried to sell the ranch first, but as it seems the Las Vegas Rancho was just about the least desired property in all of America, Helen had no choice but to learn to operate the ranch herself. Turns out, not only did she become pretty good at it, by 1890 she had become the largest landowner in Lincoln County. She had realized that the land could be very valuable in the future, especially if a railroad was to be built through it. In 1893, a post office was established at the ranch, and she was appointed the first postmaster of Las Vegas. That's not a typo. They changed the name so it wouldn't be confused with Las Vegas, New Mexico, which is ironic, considering now every person going through Las Vegas, New Mexico has to make the same dad joke. Where's the casinos at? In 1902, Helen's hunch finally came true as she was able to sell the ranch to the Los Angeles and Salt Lake Railroad for $55,000, or about $2 million in today's money. At this time, Las Vegas had a small community of around 22 people. For comparison, this is how many people Seattle, Vancouver, and Portland had at the same time. Helen decided to settle down in Las Vegas, becoming an active member of the community, even becoming the first woman on the county school board in 1916. Her importance in the origins of the city, as well as her active participation in the community, has earned her the nickname First Lady of Las Vegas. She died in 1926 in Las Vegas, and Stewart Avenue in downtown is named after her. Back in 1902, after the sale of the Las Vegas Rancho, construction began to turn Las Vegas, which they changed back to Las Vegas with an A after they learned what Spanish grammar was, into a resting stop on the rail line between Los Angeles and Salt Lake City. The rail line was the brainchild of the railroad tycoon and the U.S. Senator from Montana, William A. Clark. Las Vegas was the ideal resting and refueling stop due to the availability of water in the area, which is why the railroad wanted to buy the ranch in the first place. Clark began promoting the area to farmers, who started to expand the agricultural industry in Las Vegas, growing the town. Interestingly, there were two towns called Las Vegas at this time, obviously ignoring Las Vegas, New Mexico, or any of the other ones. See, a man named J.T. McWilliams had bought available land next to the Las Vegas Rancho during its sale to the railroad, and the town that sprung up on the lot also called itself Las Vegas. This town didn't do too well though, as Clark had bought all the water rights from Stewart and refused to share any of it with McWilliams. The Los Angeles Salt Lake Railroad was finished in 1905, after which Clark started working on a new railroad between Las Vegas and the booming gold mining town of Bullfrog. By the way, this is what it looks like today. But more importantly to our story, the Los Angeles Salt Lake Railroad Company also started to auction land adjacent to the railroad to ready buyers. And in just 2 days, Clark managed to sell over 600 lots for almost a 500% profit on his initial investment. The last day of the 2-day auction, May 15th, 1905, is now considered the official day of the founding of Las Vegas. With revenue and visitors coming in from both rail lines, the small town started to grow rapidly. Las Vegas became a driving force in carving out a new county from the area of the Lincoln County, and in 1909 the town got its wish when it became the county seat of the newly formed Clark County, named in honor of Clark Green from The Office. Then on June 1st, 1911, Las Vegas finally voted to incorporate as a city, with Peter Buell becoming the first mayor of Las Vegas. This makes Las Vegas the youngest major city in the US by date of incorporation. At the time of incorporation, Las Vegas had around 800 people. Las Vegas continued as a refueling and resting stop on the Los Angeles and Salt Lake Railway. Yard workers, miners, and visitors filled the street, and to cater to these people, a notorious red light district called Block 16 emerged. Block 16, located around this parking lot in modern-day downtown, was filled with liquor, prostitution, and gambling. This was despite Nevada having outlawed gambling in 1909. See, the Clark County Sheriff, Sam Gay, who liked to have a good time himself, was willing to just let it slide as long as it didn't bother or harm anyone outside the block. The most popular establishment on the block was definitely the Arizona Club, which was a bar and a brothel, famous for its slow gin fizz and 40-foot-long mahogany bar. It was colloquially known as the Queen of Block 16. Block 16 became quite famous in the country, and the city's popularity among train travelers and local miners grew, growing the city. All was going well for the young town until 1917, when the US entered World War I. Patriotism was high in the city, and besides signing up for the military, the people held meatless and wheatless days in support of the war effort. A total of 9 people from Clark County died on the Western Front during the war. The war also hit the city economically, as due to shortages and efforts to economize, the US Railroad Railroad Administration ordered all perishable and merchandise traffic to be directed from the Tonopah-Las Vegas route to the Tonopah-Tidewater route. The railroad was only allowed to transport ores, but since there wasn't much of that left, the railroad went bankrupt very quickly. To salvage as much money as possible, Clark sold the carts and tracks for scrap metal. Las Vegas, on the other hand, lost the other of its two railroads, leading many railroad workers to lose their jobs. Thankfully for them, it was the less significant of the two railroads, and the Los Angeles-Salt Lake Railroad continued in operation throughout the war. By late 1918, the Allies were winning the war in Europe, which filled the city with a new wave of optimism. This would be short-lived, however, as the city and the entire world was hit by another disaster when the 1918 influenza pandemic started to spread like wildfire. The city officials were so worried, in fact, that on November 4th, the city commission passed an ordinance requiring everyone to wear a face mask in public. Many people complied with the rules, while some were furious and flat out refused to wear one. Where have I heard this before? Regardless, just a week later, on November 11th, the Allies and the Germans signed the armistice ending the Great War, and a few months from that, the biggest threat of the influenza pandemic started to fade, returning Las Vegas to some form of normalcy for the first time in 2 years. And after surviving two cataclysmic worldwide events, Las Vegas was ready to step forward and make the 1920s their decade. And then, in 1919, the US Congress ratified the 18th Amendment, making the production, importation, transportation, and sale of alcohol illegal in the entire country. Now, this would have been terrible news for Las Vegas, except for the fact that they did not care. Life went on as usual in the city, and especially in Block 16. They basically just took down the signs advertising alcohol in the streets. Like mentioned before, Sheriff Gay was a heavy drinker himself, so he thought it would have been a little bit weird to start telling others to stop drinking. Besides, he hadn't cared about the blatant disregard for laws and regulations in the city for the past 10 years, so why would he start now? The city, which had reached a population of 2,300 in the 1920 census, continued its rapid growth in the 1920s. Las Vegas was a bustling place with farmers and ranchers coming to town to sell their produce, people watching as the next train arrived at the station, and all the things a small town needed, from electricity to telephone systems to banks, churches, and barbers. Also, the new Arrowhead Auto Trail now connected the city to the rest of the country by car. And Block 16 also kept going strong, providing visitors and locals alike with all the prostitution, alcohol, despite it being illegal, and gambling, with both legal games that were unbanned in 1919, as well as the illegal games, of course. On Thanksgiving Day, 1920, Anderson Field, the city's first airport, was opened, connecting the 15-year-old city to the rest of the country by air. And not long after, the post office chose Las Vegas as the refueling stop on their new airmail route between Los Angeles and Salt Lake City. This brought Las Vegas even closer to the rest of the country and brought more hustle and bustle to the city, with locals gathering to watch the airplane land whenever it would come to the city. The atmosphere around the railroad, on the other hand, was very tense at the time. See, during the war, the government had taken over all the railroads in the country, paying the railroad workers a reasonable wage. However, at the end of the war, control of the railroads returned back to the railroad companies, who subsequently cut the workers' wages. Now, in 1921, Clark decided to sell the Los Angeles-Salt Lake Railroad to the Union Pacific Railroad Company. This meant that Clark, who wasn't spoiling the railroad workers by any means, but at least had some level of attachment to the city and its population, was changed to a faceless corporation that was much more strict and cutthroat. And one of the first acts of the company was to lay off 60 to 100 people in Las Vegas. Things had already reached a boiling point when in 1922, across the country, railroad companies cut their workers' wages even further. At this point, the unions had had enough, and on July 1st, around 400,000 railroad workers nationwide went on strike. As a railroad town, Las Vegas naturally participated as well. Unionization was quite big in the city, and the strike gathered a lot of solidarity from the citizens. Sam Gay, for example, hired some of the workers as deputies, not only to financially help, but to show support for the strike. Of course, when there's a strike, there's also strike breakers, or people who continue to work despite the strike. Unfortunately, violence broke out when strikers started to beat up these strike breakers, which then forced the governor to come down to Las Vegas and try to calm down the strike. Unfortunately for the strike, one striker made a fateful mistake when he pulled a gun on the governor. The governor was able to disarm the striker, after which he called in the state police to take down the strike, and it was taken down in short order, saving the railroad heads, who had started to panic at this point. As a result, the Union Pacific raised wages, but moved many jobs out of Las Vegas, leaving many people unemployed in the city. Up to this point, Las Vegas had always been a railroad town before anything else, but this Vegas marked sort of a turning point in the city's history, as the newly unemployed people had to find alternative fields of work. One new industry that Las Vegas started to specialize in was the tourism industry. French immigrant and longtime resident of Las Vegas, David Lorenzi, dug out the Twin Lakes and opened the first resort in Las Vegas in what is now Lorenzi Park. Another entrepreneur, J.W. Woodard, recognized that a new type of traveler had been born. A lot of people would now travel by car instead of train, and to accommodate these travelers, he opened the first motel in Las Vegas. The city had always been a railroad resting stop between Los Angeles and Salt Lake City, but now people were starting to come to Las Vegas. Hotel Overland had the idea to put up a neon sign to stand out from the competition, putting up a sign that simply said hotel. Soon other businesses started to put up their own signs, each trying to make their sign more extravagant than the others. By the late 1920s, Fremont Street was filled with neon signs, giving Las Vegas its iconic look. In 1923, Nevada state legislators surprisingly decided to repeal the state's prohibition law, putting Las Vegas in a weird position where alcohol wasn't technically illegal in the state, but was illegal in the country. This meant that federal agents essentially had to enforce the prohibition in Nevada, but since their offices were based in San Francisco, by the time they decided to conduct the raid on an establishment suspected of selling alcohol, said establishment had had more than enough time to clean up shop and hide all the liquor. Now, Las Vegans were happy to keep their booze, but probably less happy about what naturally followed when organized crime took an interest in the city. In 1925, a gangster named Jim Ferguson invaded the Arizona Club with his gang, taking it over. From there, he started running the underworld of the city, taking fees from the local bootleggers and brothels. He allegedly also made a deal with the bankrupt city government, where the city police would find the illegal businesses every few months, but wouldn't shut them down. This made the city a lot of money, which funded the paving of roads and other public works. This lasted for 3 years until in 1928, when Ferguson was busted after federal agents raided his basement, where they found hundreds of gallons of whiskey. The mayor and the police chief were also arrested, but got off the hook due to a lack of evidence for the conspiracy. Meanwhile, Ferguson was sent to prison for 1 year and 1 day. When he got out, he tried to establish himself in the criminal world again, but new gangsters had taken his place. The local businesses were strong enough to fight against protection rackets, and the new sheriff was much tougher on vice crimes than the last one. He then went to Utah, spent a bunch of years in and out of prison, and eventually disappeared from history books. Returning to the non-criminal world of Las Vegas, the 1920s was also a time of great anticipation for the city. In 1928, after years of debate, the federal government in Washington, D.C. voted to build a dam in the nearby Boulder Canyon in order to harness the energy of the Colorado River. A parade was organized in Las Vegas to celebrate this decision, with people partying in the streets until they had to go to work the next morning. Why were they so excited about a dam, like a bunch of alcoholic beavers, you might ask? Well, such a large construction project was naturally going to bring a lot of new people, and with that, economic opportunities to Las Vegas. In the coming months, this drove many entrepreneurs, property investors, and other businessmen, as well as workers, to Las Vegas to hopefully profit from this coming economic boom. The federal government eventually decided to build Boulder City closer to the construction site to house the workers, but regardless, Las Vegas grew significantly thanks to the dam. The growth in the city was so great, in fact, that when the stock market crashed in 1929, beginning the Great Depression, Las Vegas was left virtually unaffected. In 1930, Las Vegas had reached a population of over 5,000, with new businesses popping up everywhere and property prices skyrocketing. Now, on the other hand, as a city of about 5,000 people, Las Vegas simply didn't have the infrastructure to hold all the tens of thousands of people coming to the city to look for jobs at the construction site. It didn't help that the government essentially just built a small shack to work as the employment building. During this time, the streets would have been filled with people lining up to even have a chance of getting a job, of which there were simply not enough for everyone. Many brought their families with them to Las Vegas, and as there weren't enough buildings to house everyone, people would sleep wherever they could, under bushes, on the benches, or on the ground. Much like elsewhere in the US at the time, shantytowns started to appear around the city. The Red Cross and Salvation Army even set up soup lines to feed the unemployed. For the lucky ones who managed to get a job, construction on the Hoover Dam began in 1931. Now, Boulder City, where all the workers lived, was run by the federal government, and therefore alcohol, gambling, and other vices were banned within city limits, which was strictly enforced. On paydays, the workers wanted to have some fun though, so they had to make the drive up to Las Vegas to let off the steam from their stressful jobs. And just like always, Block 16 was the most popular spot in town for the workers. Realizing how profitable gambling could be for local businesses and the potential it held for alleviating the economic downturn of the Great Depression, the Nevada state legislature legalized gambling in 1931, and the end of prohibition on the federal level came only 2 years later in 1933. And while small, Las Vegas, with its well-established gambling industry and its large single male population, was in the perfect position to become a prominent gambling and entertainment hub. Soon casinos and showgirl theaters started to pop up everywhere to entertain the workers. The licenses for the casinos were extremely difficult to get, so at the start, organized crime wasn't able to get a foothold on the legal gambling industry in the city. But the city didn't only entertain the workers. The Hoover Dam project had become quite the tourist attraction, so people who could afford it would travel to southern Nevada to visit the site. And as Las Vegas was the closest city that wasn't an employee housing complex, most of the tourists would stay in Las Vegas and maybe do a bit of gambling on the side. Italian immigrant Pietro Silvani opened the first luxury hotel in the city, the Hotel Apache, which was the first building in Las Vegas to have an elevator, and the upper class of the city would actually stay in the hotel just to try it out. In 1935, the dam was finally finished when President Franklin D. Roosevelt came to dedicate the dam himself. Las Vegas started to get electricity from the dam, which dropped the electricity prices for the citizens. On a less positive note, all the workers who had spent large portions of their income in Las Vegas were no longer employed by the government, leaving the city unsure how to continue its growth. Las Vegas soon came up with a plan that focused on tourism to save the city from the economic collapse, using the nearby natural wonders, good weather, and the feeling of the Wild West to promote the city to tourists. At the time, westerns and other media related to the Wild West were very popular in America, so Vegas tried to sell themselves as a Wild West town with cowboys and everything. This is despite the fact that the city's history looked less like this and more like this. The city also had the idea to hold the first Eldorado Days, a festival themed around the Wild West, something that they still do today. The second part of the marketing campaign was to promote liberties you didn't have in the other states in the Union. Obviously, gambling was one thing, but the state of Nevada had also lowered the residency requirement for divorce down to 6 weeks, at a time when divorce laws were extremely strict elsewhere in the country, which meant that people looking for divorce just needed to catch a train or a plane from LA or San Francisco and stay in Las Vegas for 6 weeks, get a divorce, and then go back home. On the other hand, Nevada also had some of the least strict marriage laws in the country, so it was actually even faster to get married in the city. You could get married and divorced in the span of 1.5 months. Many celebrities also began to come to Las Vegas for their marriages and divorces, and also to just chill at the resorts, bringing the city a new image of glamour. When the US entered the Second World War in 1941, Las Vegas had a population of around 8,400 people, while Clark County had around 16,000. Nearly 70 men from the Clark County died in the war, either in battle or from their injuries. An Army gunnery school was established northeast of the city in 1941, before US entry into the war. Las Vegans were pleased that the thousands of soldiers stationed at the school liked to come to town for entertainment in their free time. The Army, however, wasn't pleased with the legal prostitution on Block 16 and lobbied the city government to make it illegal in 1942, bringing the 37-year history of the Red Light District and the infamous Arizona Club to an abrupt end. Another way the war changed the city was when a factory was built just southeast of Las Vegas to produce magnesium, a vital element in manufacturing warplanes and bombs. Workers started flocking into southern Nevada again, creating the town of Henderson, which soon became the top producer of magnesium in the country. And just like during the Hoover Dam project, the workers started coming down to Las Vegas for entertainment. The most popular type of entertainment was of course gambling, and the city's casino industry developed a lot during the war years. In 1941, Thomas Hall, a successful hotel operator from California, opened one of these El Rancho hotels, with a casino of course, just outside the city limits on Highway 91, with an aim to target car travelers coming from Los Angeles. The hotel was successful, which attracted others to build their hotels on the highway as well. Hotel Last Frontier was opened just a year later in 1942, and over time, other hotel casinos would be built on the highway. One hotel operator on the highway, Guy McAfee, named the highway the Las Vegas Strip, in homage to the Sunset Strip in his hometown of Los Angeles, and the name stuck around. The construction of one hotel on the Strip, however, would signal a new age for the city. After the war in 1946, the mob-financed Flamingo was opened on the Las Vegas Strip. Organized crime figures had been able to get a foothold in the gambling industry of the city with the help of race wires, and had already bought some of the casinos in the city, but by 1945 they had set their sights on building their own resort on Highway 91. What made the Flamingo different from the other casinos and hotels was that it was built in a modern Art Deco style instead of the typical Wild West theme. The Flamingo became a massive success, which inspired other casinos to open on the Strip. In 1948, the Thunderbird, with a Native American theme, was the fourth resort to open on the Strip. Las Vegas, which was spending a lot of money advertising the city to tourists, wasn't happy about this development though. Not only did the Strip draw visitors away from Fremont Street, the city's traditional main street, but none of the resorts on the Strip were within city limits and therefore didn't pay any taxes to the city. The mayor tried to annex the Strip into the city in 1950, but failed after the casino owners got together and lobbied the county to create the unincorporated towns of Paradise and Winchester, with the casino managers naturally becoming the town boards of the new towns. The city experienced both explosive economic growth as well as population growth during the 1950s. At the start of the decade, the Las Vegas metropolitan area had soared to around 36,000 people, and by the end of the decade, that number would be close to 100,000. The tourism industry grew despite the general knowledge that some of the casino owners had less than well-behaved backgrounds. In 1950, the US government's Kefauver Committee started to investigate organized crime across the US. They held hearings in 14 cities across the country, including Las Vegas. However, as gambling was legal in Nevada, the investigations resulted mainly in increased scrutiny by law enforcement against illegal gambling in other states, strengthening Nevada's monopoly on gambling. More and more resorts started popping up on the Las Vegas Strip, including the Sahara, the Sands, the Riviera, and the Tropicana. Las Vegas also became more and more prominent in Hollywood movies, and shows from famous artists like Frank Sinatra grew the city's fame and popularity further and further. Besides casinos, the 1950s also saw the arrival of other Las Vegas landmarks, like the University of Nevada Las Vegas campus in 1957, the Las Vegas Convention Center in 1959, and the fabulous Las Vegas sign also in 1959. In 1950, what used to be the Army Gunnery School was renamed to the Nellis Air Force Base in honor of Lieutenant Nellis, who graduated from Las Vegas High School and died in Europe during World War II. The soldiers and employees stationed at the base continued to be a big contributor to the Las Vegas economy, and they increased in numbers when the Nevada nuclear test site was placed just 65 miles northwest of the city. This was close enough that the explosions could be seen from Las Vegas, and people would actually gather outside to watch the explosions. And not only that, but the city also advertised the explosions as a tourist attraction, served atomic cocktails at bars, and women even sported mushroom cloud-shaped hairstyles. Obviously, now we know that this was pretty unhealthy, but back in the day, the effects of radioactive fallout weren't as well known. Eventually, people got wiser to the risks they were facing, and there was a huge effort to ban the tests or move them underground. And in 1963, the US signed a treaty banning overground testing. The 1950s were also a time of rising racial tensions in the city. The city had always had minority groups from the Paiute to African Americans to Hispanics. However, segregation was extremely strict in the city. African Americans, for example, were only allowed to live on the west side of the tracks in the so-called West Side neighborhood. Since the minorities weren't allowed to go to the casinos on Fremont Street or the Strip, they had developed their own equivalent on Jackson Avenue on the west side. Minorities were also only allowed to work back-of-house jobs at the casinos so that they couldn't be seen by the customers. Even African American musicians and other entertainers coming to do shows at the casinos in Las Vegas, in most cases weren't allowed to stay at the hotel they were performing at. In 1955, however, the Moulin Rouge opened, which became the first integrated resort in the city by hiring minorities to work front-of-house jobs like waiting and dealing. The Moulin Rouge was well liked by both the whites and the minorities of the city, but unfortunately couldn't compete with the bigger casinos and resorts on Fremont Street and the Strip, and had to close down just 4.5 months after it had opened. The resort, however, was a historic stepping stone for the minority community of the city, and a sign of things to come in the future. In 1960, the local NAACP threatened the city to hold a march on Fremont Street on Saturday night, one of the busiest times of the week. This forced the city council to have a meeting with the NAACP, in which they agreed to desegregate the casinos, which meant that Las Vegas was actually ahead of the rest of the country for once, as nationwide desegregation of public accommodations wouldn't come until the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The fight against racial inequality in other areas, such as employment and schooling, would continue for a long time, however. By 1960, Las Vegas had passed Reno as the biggest city in Nevada, but with about 64,000 people, it was still quite far from the top 100 biggest cities in the US. The city experienced heavy suburbanization during the 60s, as people now had money and the cars needed to move farther out of the city. Up to this point, Fremont Street had been the main street of the city, with grocery stores, barbershops, and restaurants, alongside all the casinos. But now, with people moving out to the suburbs, all the non-casino businesses started moving out with the people. Elsewhere in America, this meant the slow death of the downtown areas for similar-sized cities. But in Vegas, this led to the street's transformation to a solely entertainment-based industry, with more and more casinos being built on the street, gaining it its nickname of Glitter Gulch. South of the city, the Las Vegas Strip also continued to expand, with the opening of the Aladdin, the Circus, and the Caesars Palace. By the end of the 60s, most of the building blocks that make modern Las Vegas were already there. In 1970, the Las Vegas metro population had more than doubled to 240,000 people. The population growth took a hit in this decade, however, with the decrease in birth rates. The city was also hit with the oil crisis in 1973, when OPEC countries set an oil embargo in the United States, leading to steep inflation in the country. This hit Las Vegas hard, as well as the rest of the country. In November of 1973, most Las Vegas casinos turned off their neon signs in support of the national effort to save energy, leaving the city without its iconic night skyline until 1975. However, the city didn't have much time to breathe, as there was another oil crisis in 1979 following the Iranian Revolution. But regardless, during the decade, the city's metro population still managed to grow by around 150,000, making it the 89th largest city city in the country, but the growth rate was much lower than in the previous decades. The 1980s didn't get off to a good start either. The city and the country would suffer from the oil crisis for the first half of the decade, but on top of that, the MGM Grand suffered a devastating fire, injuring 785 people and killing 85, which remains the worst disaster in the state's history. The casino was reopened, but sold and renamed to Bally's Las Vegas. On the other hand, a new MGM Grand would be opened less than a mile south of the original one. The 1980s also started a shift towards the city's current corporate commercialized form, when large corporations started to acquire hotels, casinos, and nightclubs, slowly overtaking the organized crime of the city. The new era kicked off in 1989 when the Mirage was opened on the Strip. It was the first mega resort to be built with money from Wall Street. With its over 3,000 rooms, each equipped with gold-tinted windows, its indoor tropical forest display, and an artificial volcano, it set a new standard of luxury for the hotels of the city. The 1990s saw the arrival of many of the most famous casinos in the city, including the new MGM Grand, the Excalibur, the Treasure Island, the Luxor, Hard Rock Hotel, the Stratosphere, the Monte Carlo, the New York, the Bellagio, Mandalay Bay, the Venetian, and the Paris Hotel. Over in downtown, Fremont Street was renovated and turned into an indoor mall called the Fremont Street Experience. By the year 2000, Las Vegas was by far the largest city founded in the 20th century, having a metro population of 1.5 million, making it the 31st largest city in the US. In the early 2000s, the city experienced a booming economy, with residential areas popping everywhere around the Strip, downtown, and the suburbs. This came to an abrupt end, however, with the 2007 mortgage crisis and the subsequent worldwide Great Recession. Many construction projects had to be cancelled, and the tourism industry suffered from the decrease in global travel. Regardless, the city still saw the opening of many new resorts, like the Palazzo, the Encore, the City Center, and the Cosmopolitan. By the 2010s, the city started to slowly recover, reaching the current record of 42.9 million visitors in 2016. Today, Las Vegas is the 29th largest city in the United States, above Cincinnati and below Sacramento. Las Vegas is one of the most visited cities in America, alongside the likes of New York City, Los Angeles, and Miami. The city is also one of the top cities in America for business conventions and a global leader in the hospitality industry. And to think this all started with a Mormon fort and a train station in the desert. Las Vegas is one of the most unlikely big cities in the world. You wouldn't expect one of the most visited tourist destinations in the world to be in the middle of nowhere in the desert. But Vegas knew what made them stand out from the start, that being gambling and tourism of course, and put almost all their eggs into that one basket. From the miners and train travelers stopping by the city to visit Block 16, to travelers flying from all over the world to have a good time on the Las Vegas Strip, Las Vegas has for generations been a place for people to come and lose a bunch of money for fun. But now that we know why on earth this place exists, I'll share my experience visiting the city. Now, you've probably noticed that this city is very different from all the other ones we visited in this series, and that is because I was actually never supposed to go here. My initial plan was to fly from Portland to Seattle and from there fly home, but when I started searching for flights between Portland and Seattle, all the cheapest options took this massive detour through Vegas. So at this point I thought, what if instead of having a 6-hour layover at the airport, I booked my Seattle flight for the next day and spent the whole day in Las Vegas. And so yeah, that's pretty much what I did. I remember the first time I ever heard of Nevada was when I was a kid, from the phrase "from here to Timbuktu." Now, if that doesn't make any sense, it's because in Finnish we say "huitsin Nevadaan," which basically means to nowhere in Nevada. I remember being amazed as a kid when I learned that Nevada was actually a real place, and now looking out of the airplane window, I can understand why that phrase became a thing. I finally arrived in Las Vegas, flying over a golf course in the middle of the desert, naturally. Unlike most cities around the world, the airport is right next to the city, so that you can get to the casino as fast as possible, which also means you'll get this sick view when you land. I got off the plane and took the next bus to my hotel, which was right next to the Sphere, built just about a month before I got there in 2023. Yes, this video has taken me that long to make. From there, I started my quick tour of the city. My first order of business was to get to the Strip, which happened to be in the same direction as the Sphere. Despite looking like an Amazon Echo made for Godzilla, the building is actually a music and entertainment venue. So far it has held concerts, movie screenings, the NHL draft, and even a UFC fight. The venue's exterior is made up of 580 square feet of LED displays, which makes it possible to display almost anything on it, like this moon, or I don't really know what this is. Anyway, moving towards the Strip, I could already start seeing some of the mega resorts featured on the boulevard. Treasure Island, for example, is one of the resorts built during the 1990s building boom. The Palazzo, on the other hand, was built during the Great Recession in the early 2000s. The boulevard itself is covered in palm trees, wacky buildings, and this one song playing on repeat for the whole day. The traffic on the Strip was pretty bad, but I thought it couldn't be that bad. So next, I decided to take a bus down to the Las Vegas welcome sign. I could have walked in the same time, but here is the Welcome to Fabulous Las Vegas sign, famous for being the Las Vegas sign. The sign was put up in 1959 to welcome visitors to the city, as this was the main road to get to Las Vegas at the time. Today, there's a massive line to get a picture with it. From there, I started to walk up the strip. At this point, I noticed how well you could see the surrounding mountains from the city. I don't know, it just kinda hit me how we're literally in the middle of nowhere. But the first stop on our way is the Mandalay Bay. Built during the 1990s, it has a subtropical and a kind of a Polynesian vibe, despite Mandalay actually being in Myanmar. It's this crazy three-winged building with gold windows and this cool dragon gate. The next resort on the strip is the Luxor, also built in the 1990s. They have built their own pyramid at 350 feet tall, making it the third tallest pyramid in the world. In front of the building, they have this massive obelisk and this sphinx, which is actually bigger than the one in Giza. So as you probably might have already guessed, the theme of this resort is rural Estonia. Next up, we have the Excalibur, also built in the 1990s. This hotel has a medieval castle theme with almost 4,000 rooms. It was actually the biggest hotel in the world for a period of 3 years. And it's also shaped like a massive castle. Would this technically be the largest castle in the world? Just down the road, we had the New York Hotel. Now, I don't know why they had to spell New York twice, but this casino hotel, also built in the 1990s, has a New York City theme, just in case I needed to make that any more obvious. The building features downsized replicas of many of New York City's most famous landmarks, like the Statue of Liberty, the Brooklyn Bridge, and even the Empire State Building. The hotel, in true Las Vegas fashion, also has a roller coaster that goes all the way around it. I tried to get the train on video, but after spending way too much time looking like an idiot filming an empty roller coaster track, I just gave up. So here's an illustration I made. On the other side of the street though stands the Tropicana. Built in 1957, it's one of the OGs on the strip. At the time of its opening, it would have stood out for how exquisite it was, but nowadays it just kinda stands out for how unremarkable it is. I mean, I find it really funny that on this road, you have a pyramid, a massive fairy tale castle, a recreation of New York City with a functional roller coaster, and a white building. Unfortunately, the hotel was closed down earlier this year and was imploded on the 9th of October to make space for a new baseball stadium for the Athletics, who are planning to move to the city. It took me so long to make this video that the Tropicana was shut down and imploded before I was able to make a YouTube video. From this point, the strip starts to get a lot busier, with massive lions, massive billboards, a massive Coke bottle, a massive guitar, massive luxury store, massive malls, massive resorts, massive. I made my way to the Paris Hotel. This hotel casino, also built in the 1990s, has a Paris theme. The reason I know this is because the hotel features a half-scale replica of the Eiffel Tower and is also named the Paris Hotel. The hotel also features replicas of the Paris Opera House, Arc de Triomphe, and the Louvre. There's also this massive hot air balloon that works as a billboard. On the other side of the street, we have the Bellagio, opened in 1998. This luxury resort is themed around the village of Bellaccio in Italy. The resort is famous for the 8.5-acre man-made lake that sits in front of the main building, which holds a dancing water fountain synchronized to music. Right next to the Bellagio, we have the Caesar's Palace, another Italian-themed resort. Opened in 1966, this resort is one of the oldest casinos still operating on the strip, and is definitely one of the most iconic resorts in Las Vegas. The resort is themed around ancient Rome, hence the name Caesar's Palace. Fun fact, this word isn't actually misspelled. The word is meant to be plural, because the point is that the guests at the hotel are treated like they were Caesars themselves. The resort prominently features ancient Romanesque architecture, which was supposed to mimic the 1960s Hollywood Roman architecture and iconography. The resort features a 20-foot-tall statue of Caesar Augustus, a Colosseum-themed theater, and a replica of the Trevi Fountain, which is from the early modern period, so not so ancient, but at least you can see this one. Next up, we have the Mirage, which also shut down this year. Built in 1989, it was the first mega resort on the strip that would begin a huge wave of new mega resorts in the 1990s. For example, almost all the ones we just visited. This resort had a Polynesian theme and was famous for the artificial volcano that sits in front of the resort, giving a free spectacle every night for the people on the strip. Hard Rock International now operates the property, intending to rebrand the resort to Hard Rock Las Vegas and put a massive guitar-shaped tower in place of the volcano. Moving on to our last main attraction on the strip, the Venetian. Opened in 1999, it is yet another Italian-themed resort on the strip. The resort is themed after Venice in Italy and features replicas of many of the city's landmarks, like St. Mark's Campanile, St. Mark's Square, the Doge's Palace, the Rialto Bridge, and a canal with gondolas. But now I had reached a point where I started by taking the bus down to the welcome sign, so the next step was to take another bus to the actual city of Las Vegas and visit Fremont Street. By this time, the sun had gone down, but I feel like that made it the perfect time to visit Fremont Street. This is the old main street of the town, which now has been turned into an indoor mall. The place is absolutely crazy, with live music, billboards, and lights everywhere. Due to the tight space, the atmosphere is completely different from the strip at night. But at this point, point it was getting pretty late, and I had a flight at 6 a.m. the next morning, so I headed back to my hotel. And speaking of my hotel, just like pretty much any other hotel in the city, it also had a casino. And I mean, I was in Vegas, so I had to try it out. Unfortunately for the hotel, I was a terrible Las Vegas tourist because after spending around 15 minutes and about $10 at the slot machine, I got bored and went back to my room. And that was the end to my brief visit to America's Playground. Now, since this visit was basically just a long layover, there were a lot of places I didn't really get the chance to visit. However, if you ever find yourself in Vegas, you could go see, for example, the old Mormon fort. Yes, the one all the way back from 1855. Which still has some of the original building left. Another one is obviously the Hoover Dam, which was one of the things that really kicked off the city's entertainment and tourism industry in the 1930s, and is still a big tourist attraction today. You could also go see the Death Valley just over the border in California. It doesn't have much to do with the city, but it's thought to be the hottest place on earth during summer. There's also a bunch of interesting museums, and of course there's so much fun stuff to do, from live concerts to sports to nightclubs to indoor skydiving to smashing a car with an excavator. Overall, this is one of the craziest, if not the craziest place on earth. And to think this place was nothing more than a dusty old fort built by the Mormons of all people only 160 years ago is just insane. But that's gonna wrap up the first series of this new show. It doesn't really have a name yet, so if you have any bright ideas, I'd be happy to hear them. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching this series. I worked really hard on it, and it took me a really long time to make. If this is the first episode you watched, you can still go back and watch the previous ones. It doesn't really affect the viewing experience that you saw this one first. Now, I'm planning to make more series of this show. Next time, we will visit a different continent. If you want to see that before people here on YouTube, the first episode will be available a week early on my Patreon as always. Additionally, my Patreon producers will have their names shown on the screen at the end of videos. If this interests you, there's a link in the description. I'll see you next time in a different part of the world.